Finally, I feel that we're far enough with the development of our 10 gigabit router that I'm confident enough to start taking pre-orders. Sort of. Let me explain. Okay, before we start with the actual updates, two things. One personal and one educational. For the personal, I celebrated my 42nd birthday on Saturday, and Aljaž, my co-founder, had this assembly drawing of our PCB printed, framed and sent over, and I think it's absolutely beautiful. It shows all the key components, most important features of the board, and even has my birthday printed on the footer of the document. I absolutely love it, and once I'm done with this video, I'll put it on this wall behind me, which is where you'll see it going forward. Aljaž, thank you. The next thing I have to share is a story that has nothing to do with our router or networking in general, but is so fundamental to any kind of business really, that I simply have to share it with you, if nothing else to set the context for when we discuss the pricing of our router. And this is not only based on a true story, it literally happened to me about a month ago. It was a Sunday in early January and my wife said she didn't feel like cooking and suggested we go out for lunch, and that, for me, only meant one thing: pizza. Now, luckily for me, we have this amazing place about 20 minutes away, and in my opinion, they make the best pizza, full stop. But once we got there, we noticed that the menu was different. It no longer had my favorite pizza listed. In fact, they completely ditched their sourdough pizzas in favor of the full grain dough, and to my luck, the owner of the place was serving that day, so me being me, I of course immediately asked what the deal was. And what he said will stay with me for a long time, because I think it's the single most important thing that any business owner should or needs to think about pretty much all the time. So here's what he said. Sourdough pizzas, compared to their yeast-based counterparts, take a bit longer to prepare, and the ingredients are also a little bit more expensive, which is why we had to price our pizzas at around $13 per pie. Full grain pizzas, on the other hand, don't cost as much to make, which is why we can price them at 10 euros per pie. And guess what? It turns out that the majority of our customers don't want to pay 13 euros for a pizza, but if we drop that price to 10 euros, even if that means not making sourdough pizzas, which many consider the best, then we have our restaurant fully booked at all times. The numbers simply don't lie. I'm sharing this story with you because I need you to understand that while, yes, I want this router to be the best of the best when it comes to its networking performance, usability, and build quality, I'm also not fooling myself that all these things come at a cost, and if I blindly follow these ideals, then I risk running the business into the ground before it even started. But if we cut a few corners here and there, which will reduce the cost of manufacturing and consequently the final price of the device, then as a consequence we'll be able to sell more of them and hopefully have a fully booked restaurant. That said though, the one compromise I'm not willing to make, like at all, is its networking performance. This is non-negotiable, and whatever we do as a cost-cutting measure, I'll make sure that it doesn't impact networking in any way. We'll talk about this more later in the video, so for now, and I guess for all the future videos I'll make regarding the pricing, keep this story in mind because I think it sets the perfect context for these kinds of discussions. Alright, onward to the updates. January has been packed with activities, the most important of which was actually done by our Dutch crew. Well, not done because it's still ongoing, and that's the board bring up. I've mentioned this in my January update, and I will not cover it in this video because I want to fly to Aljaž, to Eindhoven, in the upcoming weeks and record a ton of footage about this process because it's both interesting and complicated enough that it warrants its own video. In this one, let's instead talk about a couple of other things first, namely about the final design of the enclosure, the name of the device, and probably the most important thing in this video, the timeline for 2025. The one thing that gave me a huge analysis paralysis is the name of the router. You see, a couple of months ago, when I asked all of you for suggestions, so many good ones came in that I simply couldn't decide which one I liked the most. I even wrote down a list of my top 10 favorites and sent them not only to our team but also our designers, investors, friends, well, anyone I could think of that I knew would have a solid feedback. And you know what happened? None of them was helpful because the answers were all over the place. Picking a name for a device is much like picking a name for a child, I guess. Everyone has an opinion and likes one name that's not necessarily the same name that someone else likes. In fact, me and my wife picked the names for our kids in minutes of learning she was pregnant, so why was naming our router giving me so much trouble? Well, because I'm overthinking it, that's why. And that overthinking stops today, because we're going to call our router Gateway. Yes, Gateway. In the early days, we wanted to call it the ultimate router, but I've been reminded numerous times in the comments of these videos that this is a router and this is a router. So we're going to call it a gateway, also because that's exactly what this device is, a gateway between your home network and the World Wide Web. I might still call it a router in this and all the future videos really, simply because I've gotten so used to the word, as well as because packet routing is still its primary function, but gateway is now the official name of the device. It'll be sold in 3 variants, 2 of which will be certified, so the Founders Edition, which is right here in front of me. Next, we'll make a sheet metal version for people who just don't care about the looks and just want to put it in a rack somewhere out of sight. And finally, we'll also release a development kit, which I'll talk a lot more about shortly. So let's focus on the first 2 variants first. The problem we need to overcome is one that every electronic device faces, and that's the certification. If we want to be able to sell our gateway across the world, it of course needs to follow certain standards, and certification is a process that ensures that that's the case. I mean, don't get me wrong, certification is a good thing because it ensures that devices can be used safely, reliably, and pose no health risk to you, the consumer. But the fact remains that it's both a very expensive as well as very time-consuming process that normally takes months to complete. And if the device turns out to have an issue and it can't be certified, well, then the whole cycle starts all over again. So you fix the issue, order new prototypes, wait them to be manufactured, and then submit them to certification again. That's why we're looking at roughly half a year at best, which means that our 2 certified variants won't be available until last quarter of 2025. I hate this as much as you do, because we've all been working our asses off for more than a year now, but that's the harsh reality. It takes roughly 2 years to design, produce and certify a product of this class, and there's unfortunately no way around it. Or is it? Well, yes there is, but only if you're willing to take some risk. Those of you who have been following this channel for a while probably already know what I'm talking about. Development/evaluation kits. Today, I'm happy to answer the question that many have been asking me for the past couple of months, and that question is, when can I pre-order? And the answer to that is now, sort of. Let's call them soft pre-orders. They're not real pre-orders simply because I want to make sure we get this right, and unfortunately there's a couple of dependencies that need to be finished/fulfilled before I feel comfortable enough to start doing the real thing. Namely, we have to prepare both legal and accounting documents that will make sure you and me are both protected in this transaction. So, here's what I did. I prepared a very simple landing page, which I'll leave a link to down below in the description. And here, all you have to do is enter and confirm your email. This form is not, and I repeat, not for the Founders Edition that we're going to talk about later in the video, but for the evaluation kit. Now, you might be wondering, how are they different? Well, as I said, evaluation kits will be sold uncertified and will come in a somewhat basic polycarbonate enclosure, the prototypes for which we ordered at PCBWay, but due to their holidays haven't received yet, so all I can show you at this point are the renders. Now, when talking with people from the industry that I trust the most, every single one of them advised me to make these kits more expensive because that's the industry standard. Sony, for example, sells PlayStation evaluation kits for thousands of dollars per device. But, to be honest, that didn't sit well with me. I'm as much as a consumer as you are, So I decided I'm not going to do that. In fact, I want to reward people that put their trust in us at this early stage. And this reward is having the absolute best version of this device that will ever exist. Here's what I mean by that. During the development phase of our PCB, we decided to spare no expense, so to speak. We added every feature that the CPU supports, we added more RAM that's necessary, plus ECC support on top, we added more storage, and even the chips we decided to go with were the very best that the market has to offer. Take memories, for example. All of them are manufactured by Micron, which is not only one of the best, but also one of the 3 first-party RAM manufacturers in the world, and because of that, Micron chips are more expensive than, say, Kingston. And the same goes for our eMMC chip, NOR flash, and even the CPU we can go with a cheaper, slightly less performant version. ECC, for example, adds about $10 to $15 per board and is probably not needed and doesn't impact networking whatsoever, but we added it anyway because removing stuff from a finished board is way less complicated than adding it. Another set of components that we added for our internal testing are also a bunch of sensors and multiplexers that connect those sensors to the CPU. For the vast majority of users, those are completely unnecessary, which means that we'll likely remove them before we get into mass production. You could say that we went all in for this first version of our PCB and is as good as it will ever be. This is very relevant for the biggest supporters of the project because we decided that evaluation kits will have none of these price optimizations, meaning that all of you who pre-order them will receive the best of the best when it comes to hardware. Think of this as a way of our saying thank you for believing in us. And to sweeten the deal even further, we decided we will offer Founders Edition enclosures to all the customers who pre-order their evaluation kits, so you'll be able to move the PCB into a nicer looking case and have the best of both worlds. You will have a no-compromise PCB in a no-compromise enclosure. This episode is brought to you by PCBWay. I've been working with them on my custom keyboard project and I was super impressed with their speed, quality and price, so I'm more than happy to recommend them to anyone who needs any kind of PCB manufacturing done, whether it's just for a couple of prototypes or if you need a larger production run. Link to their website, of course, down in the description. Back to the video. Now, at first, we wanted to make a limited edition of these evaluation kits, say around 1000 units, but the more we thought about it, the less sense it made. I mean, what if these pre-orders really blow up? Why limit ourselves if we could potentially sell many more units, right? I'm saying that because I did put out several forms in the past and all of them surpassed 1000 submissions. In fact, some even crossed the 5000 entries mark. So we decided instead that we're going to limit these to one single batch regardless of the number of pre-orders, and once that batch is over, we won't be making them anymore. And by then, I mean the all-in, balls-to-the-wall evaluation kit version of the PCB. Now, before you rush off and enter your email on the landing page, we also have to discuss what the kit will include, the timeline, and what's even more important, the price. The evaluation kit for Gateway will cost $600. However, for the pre-orders, you'll only need to deposit a $100 reservation fee, which will get deducted from the final price once you'll be able to purchase the device. We'll leave the form running for the next 3 months, so until end of April, which is also the time we need to fully finalize the PCBs and make sure they live up to our standards. As I said, for now, this form is just a simple mailing list application, but in a couple of weeks it will turn into a payment form for the $100 reservation fee, and everyone that submits their email will receive a reminder that it's up and ready to collect payments. In the first week of May then, we'll order the boards with our manufacturers and we expect them to be ready anywhere between June and September of 2025. I'm giving ourselves a wide window here, and that's on purpose, because I simply don't want to become one of those Kickstarter stories in which the founders apologize to their backers for months or even years sometimes because things went wrong that they didn't anticipate in advance. I mean, don't get me wrong, it can happen to us as well, but believe me when I say I'm doing everything in my power to prevent that. And luckily for me, I have this channel and all of you beautiful people that watch my content to hold me accountable, and I expect nothing less in the future. Plus, I'm afraid of Louis Rossmann. Now, because of the limited amount of resources, we unfortunately can't get fancy when it comes to the OS, which is why the development kits will ship with OpenWRT, but will also have clear written instructions on how to flash them with either ViOS or even barebones Linux, so that you'll have plenty of options to choose from and play around with. And no, you won't need any fancy gear to do that, you'll just use a regular USB-C cable to plug it into your PC and run a couple of commands. So, if you're one of the people that reached out to me privately in the past couple of months, now is your time. Go ahead and visit the form in the description of the video, but only do so if you're 100% sure that you want to support this project and deposit a $100 reservation fee once that form is up. And if the answer to that is yes, I urge you to do so ASAP because, as you probably know, we're currently in the middle of a fundraising round, and if I can show to our potential investors that there's sufficient interest, then that will make our efforts that much easier, and as a result, we'll have much more resources to develop our stuff much faster. Okay, now that you know where things are at, let's talk about our end goal for the device, which is the Founders Edition. I won't go too much into the design of the enclosure because I've shown the top cover in one of the previous videos, but the parts you haven't seen yet are the bottom cover and what we call the foot. These have been CNC'd, sandblasted and anodized, so now I can finally show you how it all fits together. As I mentioned before, we want our users to have an easy access to M.2 ports, which is why we designed the bottom cover to have a hole in it, and there's a very good reason that it's shaped like this. You see, the CPU, when fully loaded, can easily consume around 8 watts of power, and that power, unfortunately due to physics, converts to heat. And we have to transfer away that heat somehow so that the CPU doesn't thermally throttle. On the top side of the PCB, we're solving this by pressing the top cover against the CPU with a little bit of thermal rubber in between, and because every watt counts, we decided we're going to do the same on the bottom. But that's not the only reason. Because we allow, nay, encourage our users to take a peek inside, well, we want to make sure you do so safely, both for you as well as for the PCB. And as it just so happens, it's here where the CPU is located, and underneath it there's a huge number of tiny capacitors and resistors, and the last thing we want is someone accidentally bumping into one of those with their fingers and ripping them off, which could potentially result in either degraded performance or even death of the device, which is why it made even more sense to physically prevent any kind of mishaps by adding this tab over here. Now, if we look at the bottom cover from the other side, you'll notice these two indentations, and here's where the magnets will come. As I said, we want to make it easy for anyone to access the bottom of the PCB, and having to unscrew a bunch of screws to do so makes it anything but easy. With magnets, on the other hand, this becomes a non-issue. All you have to do is press on one side of the foot, which will tilt it just enough that you'll be able to grab it by the edge on the opposite side and take it off. This is why the bottom cover has this angle at the back. For now, this is just a theory, as what you see here are basically the first real prototypes, and we have yet to test this in practice with different magnet strengths, as well as the angle and the pivot point of the bottom cover. Of course, I'll report the findings here on the channel once we get there, so make sure you're subscribed. Now, in order for the magnets to do their job, you obviously need a pair of them, so we also made the necessary indentations on the foot of the device, and it's this part that is the only component of the router that will have glue on it. I'm not a huge fan of glue because once it sets, it's pretty much impossible to take stuff apart without completely destroying one part or the other. But in this case, I don't think it's a big deal because all that this glue will hide, in a manner of speaking, are the two magnets that will be covered by a rubber pad, which will be glued to the bottom surface of the foot. We're currently ordering these pads, so hopefully I'll be able to show you how it all fits together in the next month's update video. There is one huge downside to all of this, however, and that downside, obviously, is price. These prototypes that I'm showing you today have both been CNC'd and anodized completely for free, thanks to my friend Boštjan, who owns a CNC shop, and Tadej, who is one of the most renowned anodizers in the country. However, once we get to the serial production, these will of course cost money to make, and from our talks with both of them, it appears that both the bottom cover and the foot combined will likely cost roughly as much as the top cover itself. I mean, don't get me wrong, I absolutely love how everything feels, well, premium, but I'm not fooling myself, or anyone else for that matter. If the device costs too much to make, then it'll be too expensive for the majority of our target audience, and as a result, not enough people will buy it, which makes all of this effort a losing battle. I don't have a concrete solution at this point yet, but one idea that we discussed that would make this significantly cheaper to make is to only CNC mill the top cover, while the bottom two parts would be made out of plastic. We'll probably 3D print some prototypes in the near future to see how they differ from the aluminum parts, and I'll of course share all of it right here on the channel. When it comes to the overall design of the device that you see here in front of me, I'd say it's not quite done yet, but we're not that far off either. I'd say this is about 95% there. The only two things that are missing is some subtle branding and the final color. I wanted this to be a bit of a surprise, but to be honest, I've gotten nothing but "we can't do that" when I called around, so I might as well share my plans. So, our plan all along was to have the top cover, which is pretty much the only visible part once you put the device on the desk, white. However, the one color you cannot anodize aluminum in is, you guessed it, white. The reason has everything to do with physics. You see, anodizing, in a nutshell, is first etching the surface, which creates these tiny holes on the surface of the material, then dipping the products into a dyed solution, which, because of the temperature and the current that's running through the part, attracts that dye onto the surface, where the dye molecules anchor into the previously etched holes. The problem with the white dye is that the molecules themselves are too big, so they can't physically get into those holes, which means that if we tried, it would basically just wash off. I'm oversimplifying things here, of course, but that is the root of our problem. Now, luckily for us, there are alternatives to anodization, such as powder coating or Cerakote, but we ruled those out as the former makes the device look wet, for lack of a better word, while the latter needs to be done by hand and is thus way less precise, repeatable, and is also more expensive. The only alternative I was able to find that would get me what I want is called electrophoretic deposition, which much like anodization is also an electrochemical procedure, but unlike anodization does allow for a white color, also known as an E-white. But the problem with that is I couldn't find a single manufacturer, probably in a radius of 1000 kilometers. So there are two alternatives here. We either forget about the white color in the first place and just pick a color that can be anodized, or we expand our search until we find someone that can do E-white. I'll keep you updated on this because as much as it is frustrating, I must admit solving this kind of problems is also fun. At least for me. Now, before we wrap this up, let me again thank you for watching, thank you for subscribing, and thank you for all the kind words of encouragements all of you have been writing either in the comments below my videos or on other social media platforms where I share my progress a bit more frequently than I do here on YouTube. Now go ahead and fill out that pre-order form. Tomasz from Slovenia, signing out.